Hello and welcome. Today is the day that we install Jackrabbit version 2 alpha. So let us get right into the details and go from there. We are on the wiki page and we will be going back and forth to this page a lot. So please be sure to read it completely through first before you start the installation. Okay, I am going to go into the installation part. And before you really get started, again, read everything thoroughly. Now, there is a video on virtual screens, and I heavily recommend it because it makes the whole job easier. Be sure to read and carefully check all of the requirements. So let's go through that process now. So let's go to my VPS, pip3, okay, I have it, it's installed. If you don't have it installed, follow the instructions and install it. Also, now we're going to check the stat command. Both are required for Relay version 2 to work properly. And this is a Python version 3 product. Now, most modern VPSs come with Python automatically, but if you want to double check and verify your VPS, then this is how you do it. So we basically have everything we need to begin the installation. Now, I've already gone through and uninstalled version 1 after I made all my backup copies and safe copies that the instructions here tell you. So all of this is complete for me. Follow through. If you have version 1, take your time, follow these steps. Please be careful with it because it preserves all of your information. And I will show you exactly what that should look like. So if you have version 1, you'll see your backups and your copies in the Home 2 folder. So let's go back to the GitHub wiki. And that puts us here. Now, before going too much further, I want to bring up one particular question that I have been asked. And that is, why did I choose the Home folder to put all the files into rather than just installing into the default system folders? That really is a good question and one that does need to be answered. I chose this because as someone who has been a system administrator for 12 years, I built my own server, I installed all the software, I modified all the software, and I built a full high-yield system that had literally hundreds of thousands of different packages installed. The one thing that always bothered me is an application that did not serve the server, putting itself in a system area. Applications that don't specifically manage or assist in the maintenance and running of the server do not belong in the server areas. So when I built Relay, I wanted to make sure it did not sit in any server areas. That was my primary reason. The secondary reason is I don't like files scattered everywhere. I know with Relay, all of my files are going to be into the Home Jackrabbit 2 folder. So if I want to back them up, I don't have to worry about going and looking for files. If I want to upgrade my VPS, I can simply make a copy of the home directory. And I have every single file I need, including my configurations, where I can safely make sure I have what I need to move to a new server, unpack it, and I am back in business. So that is why I chose the home folder. So let's start with these commands here. We're going to copy them. And now let's go back to our VPS. And now we're going to paste them. Now you probably will have to press enter on the last line. As you can see here, it doesn't quite translate from the copy. And now we have installed Jackrabbit Relay version 2 alpha. That's the easy part. Installation is very easy. Now we get to the fun part. Now we get to configure it. Now that we have the GitHub repository fully installed onto our VPS, now we need to actually install the files into the working folder. We don't actually run Relay out of the repository folder. The reason is when we do our routine updates, we don't want files overwritten directly. We want to go through a proper install process to ensure that there is planning and preparation if needed for an installation. So let's go back to our wiki page, get the installation for the working folder. And now we paste those commands. Now this goes through a lot of stuff, including checking various Python packages to make sure that everything is up and running for our system. Any Python packages not present will be installed, and you will probably see quite a few if this is your first time using Jackrabbit Relay. If you've been running Relay version 1, then most of this is already old information, and there's going to probably be very few packages that will be installed. So now that we are up to date and ready to move to the next step, we're going to activate our virtual console. I chose to wait until now because the advantages with waiting to this point is that the folder we are in becomes the base folder when we create new virtual screens. Okay, we have the disclaimer and we have our first virtual screen. So if I create a new screen, you'll see it started in the place that I ran the command in. We don't need this screen right now, so we're going to go back to our first one. At this point, I want to do a brief walkthrough of the files that you now have in your system. So I'm going to use Midnight Commander. If you don't have it, when you type this command, it will bring up a message telling you what you need to install if you want to use it. It's not necessary to have specifically this program, as any file manager will work. But from the standpoint of this demonstration, this one stands up pretty well. So we are in the GitHub Relay folder on both panels. I'm going to press the Tab key, go to the right panel, and now we have our newly created Jackrabbit Relay version 2. Now, if you have not ran version 1 at all, you will not have the Relay version 1 folder. If you have ran Relay version 1, don't delete this folder because you can use this to help you set up your version 2. So let's go into the working folder, and this is the folder that the program will actually run out of. And let's talk about what each of these components represent. The base directory, that's all the main programs that support Relay, and the extraneous library functions as well that support all of the components. You have all of the server parts, and then you have all of the other subprograms needed that make the whole system work. The config folder. This is where all of your configurations will go. And as you can see, it is empty. Nothing here. Now I'm pressing the tab key to go back to the left panel. And in the GitHub folder, there are examples that we are going to use to help set up our working system. But for now, let's continue with the tour of the file area. The data area is where files dealing with symbol maps or tracking assets or things of the internal structure of Relay are kept. And it will grow and change dynamically over time based upon your trading habits. The extras folders. This is a few extra programs that we will need, and some other testing mechanisms in case something breaks. Programs that I've built over time of testing Relay to help track issues. Overall, this is not something you want to really mess with right away unless you're using Relay as a learning tool, and then you'll find quite a bit of resources here and information about how Relay really works. The ledger folder. Relay tracks every single transaction, and when it completes, it writes out a ledger record. That information is done such that you can actually correlate it for your taxes or financial needs. It is a legal requirement in many jurisdictions that when you trade cryptocurrencies, forex, or stocks, that you prepare a list of what you have actually traded. This folder contains that information to help you in that process. The logs folder. This is where things really take place. Now I have a few examples in my system, but your side is going to be completely blank. And that is going to be really the biggest thing that you will spend most of your time in. This is where things happen. Every transaction gets recorded and put here. And the main folders, or I should say the main files. Now Kill Jackrabbit is used to shut down the entire Jackrabbit Relay system. It's comprised of 3 different servers, and it can be quite difficult managing all 3 of them without this command. The Start Jackrabbit program is what we actually use to start up all 3 servers and bring the system online. The Update Placeholders program. This is an important one to remember to do, because once we do have a working exchange, you're going to need to update the place orders in order to ensure that the new code in your place order takes place. This isn't done by default because this system supports over 100 exchanges. If I was to run this program automatically for every supported exchange, it would add literally 200 files to your system. So it is better that you run it for the exchanges you want when you do your updates. And I will demonstrate some of the files that you will see. For example, this file here is specifically for the cryptocurrency CCXT framework. It would be copied 100 times on the basis of whether or not an exchange supported a spot market. If I was just to blanket do it across the board. But by you picking and choosing, say Binance or KuCoin, you only get the files on your system you are actually using. It's more efficient and effective for your system. So that really takes care of the tour. Of course, the install command we've already used. The files are very simple and very easily kept. And as I said, if you want to back up your system, you need only back up the home folder and you have your entire system completely backed up. You don't need to go and find where every little program is hiding. So the next part will be actually beginning the configuration process. In beginning the configuration part, we need to take our time and proceed slowly. You will need to be logged into your favorite exchange so that you can get and copy your API and secret, or any other information that your exchange requires for you to be able to log into it. Let's go back to the wiki and look at the next step. The very first thing we need to do with our system is we need to establish an identity. So let's actually see what that looks like. So we copy the command and we paste it into the system. And we get this Frankenstein mess of characters on the screen. This is the identity that each and every order needs to have embedded into it. Or I should say specifically, this is an identity. It's not been saved to disk yet, so it's not active. But I wanted to demonstrate the significance of what this is, because it is really overwhelming when you first see it. You can technically use any identity string you want, but I purposely built this particular framework to generate an identity that will be obnoxiously difficult to break. In the world of hacking, it's not a matter of whether or not something can be broken. It's a matter of how long it takes a hacker to break it. The more difficult you make the process, the less likely you are going to be a target. It falls under the law of diminishing returns. If you have an identity that is only 5 or 6 letters long versus something as hideous as what you see on the screen, it's clearly visible who is more likely to be a target at first. Identity is one of those obnoxious standpoints that just really makes life miserable for you and for an intended attacker looking to target your system. The biggest concern that you have to deal with and worry about is somebody trying to inject orders through the server to try to take your account over. Something like this helps prevent that. No system is immune from being hacked. Every system can be hacked. It's only a matter of time. You want to make sure that you make it as difficult as possible to be a target. This approach does that. I know it's a pain to have to copy this Frankenstein mess everywhere in your configurations or in your orders. My own TradingView order list, I have 48 orders right now, or 48 alerts. Every alert has some hideous form of this. It's not easy to copy and paste this mess into that tiny little box that TradingView gives. But it's an assurance that you've done the best you can to reasonably make an effort to protect your system. This, coupled with your firewall and other security measures built into Relay, add to your protection. Do not take shortcuts with your security. Remember, at some point, this program is going to be using your real money. With the identity on the screen not being saved, we actually need to save our identity to disk. So let's go back to the wiki and get the command that actually saves the identity. So now we are going to actually take and create an identity that will be saved on disk, and it will become our global identity. So we paste the command in, and you can see now that the command line is slightly different than the one we used above. This time we didn't get an output, and the identity is stored in a file. Pressing Ctrl L will clear your screen. So let's see what that looks like. So here is our identity file, and we can actually see the contents of it. And here is the actual identity that will be used in your alerts. That is, when you make your order payload, this is what we will use as a part of that process. It is forebodingly difficult to actually look at, and quite frankly disturbing that you need to use this much security to protect your system. But in the world we live in, there's no room for chances and no room for second guessing whether or not you've made every effort you can to protect your system. Now we move to the second part or layer of our security, the actual IP list. I'm going to use the file manager to make this step a little easier. You can move around and copy from the command line if you want, but I prefer the file manager as the visual representation to make it easier to see what I am doing. So I'm going to go back to Midnight Commander, and you'll see that both panels started up in the config folder. So next, let's go back to the GitHub folder, into the relay folder, and into the config folder. The next file we want to copy and use as a blueprint is the IP list file. So pressing F5 will copy it into our working folder. Tap key to get back to the panel. Now we can either one, exit Midnight Commander and edit this from the command line, or two, we can stay in Midnight Commander and simply press F4 and let it bring up an editor for us. I'm going to press F4 and it's going to bring up the editor. Now this is the editor that is configured for my system. Your system may have a different editor, which is fine. There's nothing to worry about. So let's move to the next step. Localhost is this machine. The very VPS itself has a number that specifically points to it. These four numbers go to TradingView. If you use TradingView, you are going to want these numbers extensively because they help isolate only TradingView as the allowed IP addresses. They should also be in your firewall. And now let's get to our own VPS address. This is your public address, the one that TradingView will need to connect to, or any other service that you deliberately want to be able to pass orders through. So in my case, my public IP address for my server press enter, save it according to your file editor, and you have a complete working IP list. This list should actually be mirrored in your VPS firewall. You only want these systems to connect to your Jackrabbit Relay. This is the second part of the relay defense system. So your total system right now has 3 layers: your hardware firewall, your identity, and now your IP list. So now we have 2 files in our configuration folder. Now we actually move on to what we need for configuring our exchange. There are 2 files here that right away we are going to need. And that is the DSR and the tester. These are virtual exchanges. And you can find out more about that in the wiki. So for now, let's go back to the wiki. And as you can see, we've just completed this step. And it talks about what we just did. How to copy the files from the command line and then how to edit them. We've already done that, so now we are at the configure stage. Now we need to actually set up and configure our exchanges, or exchange if you only want one. So let's open this into a new tab. Now we have the configuration part. This is arguably the most difficult part of setting up Jackrabbit Relay. So let's get into the details of what it takes to configure an exchange. Well, first of all, we obviously need to find out what exchange we're going to work with. Now, for the purposes of this example, I am going to use the Binance Test Net. So again, I'm opening up another window to the supported exchanges. And we read through this, and we come down, and we have Binance. We know that it supports limit and market orders. It has a main account, a spot account, a funding, a margin, a futures, a cross, and a delivery account. And it requires an API key and an API secret. So, for the purposes of Binance, you will need to log into your exchange, go into the API section of the Binance Exchange website, and then request and get that information so that when we get to that point in your configuration, you will simply be able to copy it and paste it into your configuration. So going back to our VPS, we need the DSR as a virtual exchange. So we're going to copy that with F5 and enter. And because we want to be able to run tests before we actually start getting near the test net, we want the tester API or the tester config file. Now these files are technically virtual exchanges. They are not real exchanges. I'll go in and demonstrate that process. You get a very long-winded description, and it talks about this in detail. So be sure to read everything, and we will be demonstrating this in the future more directly in terms of just how important this is when working with TradingView. But for now, we have that. Now we have several sample configurations to actually look at. Let's look at Kraken. Now I'm going to use F2 and wrap the lines so we can see everything. Configuration files in Jackrabbit Relay are very simple JSON or XML style. They always start and end with the curly brace, and they are completely on one line. So this is how it should look in the editor. One line only. But for the purposes of you seeing what is in this file, I'm going to wrap it, and then I'm going to talk about a few of these elements. Framework is required. In order for Relay to support as many brokers and exchanges as it does through frameworks. Right now, the two frameworks are CCXT and OANDA. So you have to have a framework. All cryptocurrency markets right now use the CCXT framework. In the future, that may change, and they will be listed on the wiki. But for now, this will be our example. Account. When you create your API on your exchange, it will ask you for an account. Most exchanges want your first account named main. This may not necessarily be the case of a given exchange, and you can try anything you want as long as you're consistent. The point and purpose of the account is to give this API reference an easy name in your order without divulging your API key. So when I want to access the main account on the Kraken exchange, or when I want to access this specific account tied to this specific API, I only need to put in my order the word main. TradingView does not actually see the API or secret. It's kept protected by this framework. The API and secret are given to you by the exchange. And these aren't necessarily the only requirements that exchanges might give you. Some exchanges require a user ID. Some require a username. Some require a separate password. Some require a trading password. All of that information is on the exchange's list that I just showed you from the wiki. Now, the rate limit. Every exchange has a rate by which you can send orders. This is in milliseconds. If you break the rate limit, there is a good chance you will get banned. It is your responsibility to actually figure out what that rate limit is. The default rate limit starts at 1000 milliseconds. Through reading Kraken's documentation and talking to their support, I have learned that my account has a rate limit of 100 milliseconds. The retry limit. You need to retry sometimes because the internet is the internet and things sometimes break in the middle. The default is usually 3 tries, but I like to put it in there explicitly because some exchanges might need less or more depending upon your geography. So let's unwrap this and get out of this file, and let's look at a slightly different exchange possibility. Now here is an interesting situation where this particular exchange allows more than one API secret combination per a single account. Some exchanges allow this, some don't. Your documentation on your exchange will tell you what the exchange actually allows. The other thing particular to KuCoin is, along with the API and secret, is it requires a password or passphrase. Now, as you can see, it's one reference per line. If I try to wrap this, it gets messy. So I'm not going to wrap this one, and I'm simply going to scroll so that we can talk about a few more elements. So we see the passphrase, then we see a new reference, max assets. This allows me to set up 200 or 300 different alerts, meaning I can trade 300 different coins at one time. But Relay will only allow the first 7 to actually trade. So this is a great way of taking a small budget and being very opportunistic on the number of assets you want to trade. Assets that are more volume and volatility are more likely to trade quicker than assets that have less volume and volatility. But if you always want a trade underway, this is a good way to make sure you always have an opportunity without overextending your budget. And finally, webhook is something that we haven't seen either. This is an internal reference point to your Relay server. Extended programs and functions within Relay use this to communicate back to the server without leaving the server directly. It's kind of like a back door that doesn't bypass security. So if you take this in the context of your house, your front door is your public API, your public IP address. Your back door is the local host. Both of them go through the same security layer internal to your machine. It's just one is faster than the other. The local host address is always faster when you need to talk to the server internally. Now the port number, my system, I have set up for port 7732. Be sure you use your port number, and it needs to be consistent through every part of Relay. And when we get to actually starting Relay, you'll see the significance of that port number. You can go from 2,000 to 50,000. Pick a port that you like that isn't used by something else. That's not always easy to figure out, but usually if you stay within the 5 to 45,000 range, you're not very likely to find somebody else using that port as well. Now, if you are specifically connecting to TradingView, you need to be aware that the port you have to use with TradingView is port 80. So now that we have seen the examples, we're going to copy one of these files to our working directory, and we will use that as the blueprint for our working directory. So let's copy the KuCoin file, and we're going to modify it. Now I can rename it here, but I'm going to do that separately. So here we're just going to copy it, and now I'm going to come in and pressing F6. I'm going to rename it to Binance.cfg. Now let's edit and clean it up a little. Okay. I only want one API for now. And Binance does not need a passphrase. So I'm going to delete this. I only want to trade 3 coins at a time right now. Let's start out slow and easy. The webhook is the way I want it, and I know Binance has a safe level of 200 milliseconds. So I'm going to change that for my rate limit. I'm going to continue to use my port of 7732. So now we have the basic blueprint. Now we go to our exchange and we get the API and secret and paste it in. For the time being, we are going to go back to the wiki and talk about some of the configuration elements. As we can see here, there is a complete list of different configuration elements that we may need specific to a given exchange. Your exchange documentation will tell you a lot of it. But for some things, there's also the known issues and of course the support server if you are not sure what you might need for your specific exchange. Now, for the purposes of the demonstration, I have already gotten my API key and such from my Binance test net. And I've already plugged that information in place. And you'll see I renamed my account from main to sandbox. Now, normally you should never, ever, under any circumstances, give out your API and secret. And these two will be deleted when I am done with this video. So here we have the API and the secret. And we have another reference from the configuration. Binance works very uniquely in the way it takes its fees. So when you place an order, you always have to make sure you have enough left to pay your fees. I have found through trial and experience of my account that this rate works well for me. But really, the best place to start when you don't know is with the exchange fees. And for Binance, exchange fees always start at the very basic level of a maker and a taker combined rate of 0.2%. Do not put the percent sign, but you do need to put reduction. If you don't put reduction, when you issue a close command, it will fail and tell you you don't have enough balance, because it will take the amount in the account and try to add the fees to that, which pushes you over what your actual account balance is. So you need to reduce the final amount in your balance by enough to make sure your fees are paid for. So we have the rate limit, the maximum number of assets, and one new reference called Sandbox. For cryptocurrency exchanges, they have a live API and a Sandbox API. You need to explicitly tell the exchange which one you want to use. We are telling the exchange with this information that we only want to use its test net. We do not want real money used right now. We only want to test it. That is what this does. It ensures that we don't actually put real money at risk while we are setting up and making sure our system is set up properly. So now that we have a working exchange configuration, we can begin actually moving to the next step. From this point, we go back to the wiki and go through the next step it shows. So we've completed the configuration part, and now we are at the next part. We actually set up for TradingView and we run the update place order. So let's go back to our VPS, get out of this, go back to our GitHub folder, into our Jackrabbit folder. Now from here, we need to update the TradingView symbol map, and that is in the Extras folder. Now you need to give it the exchange and the account. The exchange we are using is Binance from the config file, and the account we are using that we gave in the account reference is Sandbox. You only need to do this part once for each new exchange you trade on. From here, every time you run the update process through the install script, this file is automatically updated for you. And it has created the symbol map file for us to link TradingView to Relay. Now, let's go back to the next part of the wiki. And the next part is the update place order. This is an interesting program, but extremely important. So, update place order, and we put the exchange or exchanges we want to use. For now, we only want to use the Binance exchange. Press enter, and it's done. It's created a working version of the DSR, a working version of OANDA, which you may or may not want, a working version of Tester, and 2 working versions, one for spot and futures tradings. It has created one specifically for Binance, for both spot and futures markets. So at this point, we have a system that is actually ready to run. So let's go back to the wiki and see what our next step is. Our next step is to start it up, either through the reboot of the server itself or manually, or preferably both. So I'm going to demonstrate a technique that I prefer, that I find easier when working with the automated startup system. So because we don't know what shape our system is in, the first thing we want to do is look at our cron tab. Here is the existing cron tab for my server. You can see where I already have the startup line, and I've commented out version 1 and a whole bunch of other weird stuff. But for the sake of the video, let's go through the practice. So now that we see it, now we redirect it to a file. You can edit directly through cron tab. I don't like to. I like to save its contents to a file called cron jobs. And then I like to use my own editor to modify cron jobs. So now here we are. This is how you start Jackrabbit Relay version 2. And you need to pick a port. Again, going from 2,000 to roughly 50,000, something that you will use all the time. Now, if you plan on explicitly and only using TradingView or any similar platform like TradingView, then your port needs to be 80. In my case, my situation is more complicated because I already have a working web server. So I've tucked Relay under my existing web server. But for the standpoint of a fresh install and what you are most likely going to be faced with, your port is going to be 80. So once you have everything said and done, saved with Control S or whatever program your function uses for saving, quit your editor and then cron tab and the name of the file you gave it, and it will load your settings. So now we have the startup system already set. Now you can simply reboot your system and it will go to town and do whatever it needs to do. I'm going to start my system from the command line or a manual startup. So, home, Jackrabbit 2, Jackrabbit 2, not 1. Check your typing. And now we see the start Jackrabbit, and I give it my port. You must give it your port number. If you don't, this is what you will get. So now we start it up. And it will take a few seconds for everything to spin up and get to working. Now that we have it running, all 3 servers are running. Let me demonstrate that with a command called htop. You don't need this command to verify it, but it makes it easier. If it's not on your server, more than likely your VPS will give you the command instructions you need to install it. So let's go F4 to filter out this list and simply type Jack for Jackrabbit. And we have the beginnings of a working server. So we see that everything is the way it should be. Everything is working and doing very well. So at this point we have a working server, and our next step would be to set up and test with TradingView. Now we go back to the wiki and we go to the orders section. So go to the menu on the right hand side, and we have the orders section where we talk about the payload for your order. The part needed to actually make an order to begin testing and seeing if everything is working. Now this is a little bit complicated looking, but it's really not in practice. And I have a few examples that we're going to borrow from to really get an idea of just how easy this is. For example, let's take a look at the first example. Binance Spot Market, the account is made for the example. We will use Sandbox. We want to buy the asset, and notice here we use a TradingView ticker symbol macro, as it's often called, and then the symbol map, yes. That is the whole point of TV to exchange program. We want to use this type of a system
and let Relay remap it from TradingView to what Binance will accept. And then of course in this example we purchased $30. Now we need to get the test script, and that is on TradingView already, and it is free. Let's come back up to this part. Testing TradingView connection. Now I'm going to open this into another window to make it easier to move back and forth. And as you can see, here it talks about explicitly the very steps we need to set up a test market. And it talks about the TradingView Pine script generator. This generates signals that we can actually feed into our system to take advantage of the testing process. So let's open that into a new tab. And it loads TradingView, and it loads the signal generator. From here, you simply come down, add to your favorite indicators. So we click on add, and now we can go to a blank chart and add this indicator. So we can close this window now. I have a blank chart here. Let's bring up our indicators, go to our favorites, and try to find the one that I just put in here. Here we are, signal generator and my name. Okay, it's loaded on the chart. And now as you can see, it generates a lot of signals. Do not use this for trading. Whatever you do, you will lose money. This is only for testing to make sure your system is working properly. Now I picked BTC USD on the 1 minute time frame. If we zoom into this account, or zoom into this chart, you see that it generates one signal for every single candle. If the candle is red, it generates a buy signal. If the candle is green, it generates a sell signal. This is the perfect way to test that your system is working the way it should. So from here, we have our very basic system. Now we need to actually establish the order alert. Set up the payload to actually communicate to Relay. So let's come back here, and I'm going to copy this message. Now I'm going to go back to TradingView, click on the alert button. Now we have a TradingView alert screen. And we have tester listed, so that is what we will use. Now, this will work with any TradingView script that sends alerts, whether it's Jackrabbit TV, my premium system, or one you write yourself, or any of the dozens of indicators and strategies available through TradingView itself. I'm going to give this a name so that it shows up at the top for me. And now the webhook. As I said in the last part, I am using a web server. So this webhook shows my web server. You are going to be using your IP address colon your port. So yours will actually look something like this. And hopefully it won't be as difficult for you to type in what you need as I seem to be having a problem with. Your IP address colon your port, which will be 80. TradingView requires only port 80. I'm going to reset this one to my server so I can demonstrate this. Now we paste the message that we just copied. Now the thing about TradingView is you don't have to have your payload all squished up. So I'm going to stretch this out to make it easier to see, because there are some things that you have to really pay attention to with respect to setting this up. It's very easy to end up with a payload that doesn't work right. And now I need to go and get my identity. In order for this to work right, we must have an identity. Now that I have gone and plugged in my identity, all orders must start with an open curly brace. You must have your exchange. For the purposes that we're doing right now, we are testing. So we are using the tester exchange. Check for typos because they can really mess this up. Every single line must have a reference and then a value followed by a comma, except the last line. Now these do not need to be in any order whatsoever, but I recommend you stay with a consistent pattern to make it easy for you to track issues, particularly for typing as you begin to build multiple orders. So we have the exchange, we have the market. I am explicitly working on the spot market. The name of the account that we are using is Sandbox. The action that we want to do is buy. The asset is the TradingView ticker macro, so it will be whatever TradingView chart is on. And then, of course, your identity. You must have the identity. And this established it on the wrong chart. And as you can see the whole message when you click on it, verify it, make sure it's correct. In this case, ours isn't correct, so we're going to cheat. And I'm going to copy this whole message. Then I'm going to delete this one because it set it up on the wrong symbol. Thank you. And now we want to go to BTC. Take your time. Mistakes are easy to happen, but they're easy to catch. So now we have Binance USDT. Let's click on the alert button. Make sure you're on the 1 minute chart. Okay. Tester. Once per bar, buy the asset. I want this to show up at the top. And I want my message or my payload. So there is our payload. Now that we're sure our alert is correct, it's on the right time frame, it's on the right asset, we click on Create. Now we see it in the list. Now let's copy or clone specifically this alert. And now we are going to set up the cell. Edit, buy asset, sell asset, and you need to make the change in the payload. Now, I like to specifically put on the title as well. This helps me see visually in my list what's going on. Save it, and now you wait a few minutes. The flashing means the alert triggered. So if everything is working right in our VPS, we should see these trades being registered. Let's go and see. Okay, now that we are in a VPS, let's actually go take a look at our log folder. Now, in between all of these various little clips, I restored my working system, so you will see more of a realistic approach of what you would get in a full running environment. And you can see I've done both a lot of testing and a lot of logging. This is the kind of stuff you can expect to see as your system begins to really work and function. And you can see the various references to exchange, frameworks, so forth. And here is our tester log. Using the Midnight Commander view function, we actually see tester processing the order. This gives a simulated approach of what we can expect. And as we can see, it is working the way it should. Both buy and sell orders are being processed as they should. Our server is working the way it should be working, and we are receiving orders from TradingView. We have successfully set up Jackrabbit Relay version 2 alpha. So let's get out of this. Go back to Trading View. Once you have seen and established that your alerts are working, you can go ahead and either delete or stop your test alerts. I'm going to delete them because I don't want my system to fill up with these logs. But if you ever suspect problems with your system, this is how you find them. So we have a working system. It works, and now through the hundreds of thousands of possibilities from my own product of Jackrabbit TV, which we see here, and let me load a chart. Okay, now with a simple chart loaded, you can see just how profitable algorithmic trading is. Whether it's this type of approach with Jackrabbit TV or literally thousands of choices that produce alerts that can be tested and ensure they are profitable. This really is just the beginning of where you can go. Let me know if you have any problems whatsoever throughout the setup process. Be sure to visit the support server, or if you do have an issue, you can always use the ticket system as well to file the issues. I make every effort to make sure I am available for any questions whatsoever. So please let me know. And welcome to Jackrabbit Relay version 2. From here, it is only going to get better, because there are many things that have already been requested, and you can find those in the roadmap, including other exchanges and brokerages. For example, there's already been requests for Finandi, Robinhood, and TD Ameritrade, and extended duration requests for Gain Capital, IC Markets. So let me know what exchanges you'd like to see added, or brokerages. Until next time.